Welcome to the next edition of Moves That Matters. This is a podcast dedicated to understanding and studying and talking about economic development in the Concho Valley and the greater region. My guest today is well known in San Angelo. His name is Mayor Tom Thompson, longtime San Angelo resident and very familiar face around the Concho Valley. Tom, welcome.
Glad to be here. I appreciate the invite.
So, how's it feel to be mayor for the relatively brief period of time?
We're 6 months in, right at it. There's a lot of things you learn in the process, a lot of things you want to go and you want to help everybody. You now get to the point where you've made your initial introductions and hello, and you've met people. It's the point now that we sit down and plan for strategy. There's short-term goals and there's long-term objectives. And those long-term objectives, we're now focusing on. I mean, we've got 3.5 years to go here for the end of my first term. And I've got a lot of initiatives on my plate that we want to execute. We want to properly execute. We want to do things that help all the citizens, not just specific areas. So I would say, as to sum it up, and it's been a whirlwind. We had a little bit of a flood. We've had some other things kind of happen, but nothing that the team here at the city of San Angelo wasn't well equipped and handled extremely well. I hear so many comments across the state about how well San Angelo came through their flood response recovery, our economic development plans and our initiatives. And thanks to you, a lot of those things are moving forward. So it's been a whirlwind 6 months, but it's a fun 6 months.
You know, a lot of economic developers around the state, we spend a lot of time with them and talk to them. And one of the things that recurring themes keeps coming up, and that is that economic development, which is really basically community development in a lot of ways, it should be fun. It should be joyous. It should be something we rejoice about. It's never easy. Progress is always difficult. And it's kind of a market-driven divergence between nostalgia and where a community wants to go in its future. And sometimes that becomes a very emotional issue. And so my experience under your tenure so far really has been a little bit of communication with you, and I guess you'd say an elected political level. But one of the things that I've enjoyed is, in the 11 years I've been here in the economic development role, is working with the staff. And that's probably my favorite thing to do.
It is.
The staff, and I was in Austin. As some people don't know, I was in Austin, not as an economic developer per se, but I was in the commercial real estate development business and did that for a long time. And so we worked with a lot of city staff of different cities, so Round Rock, Pflugerville, Georgetown, Austin, and then, of course, with the counties as well. So you get to understand what it's like to be in that role. And it's a role that a lot of people don't understand.
People have no idea. And I've seen them as they've come on council. I saw them in the first wave of my first term as SMD2 and the second wave of SMD2. And as people come on the council and they work with staff, you'll hear them say within the first 60 days, I had no idea this is what people have to do. And I say a lot of times people's engagement with the city or municipality or county is never on a great note. I mean, they come to you, they're frustrated, they're mad, they're upset.
Mm-hmm.
And the team, and I'll speak on Judge Carter's behalf for the county, we've got an A team all the way across the board, from the outside all the way in to the center and back out again. We really don't have some B team players. It's all A team, and comparing them to, other cities our same size, I think we have an outstanding staff all the way across the board.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and that's something that I like. I wanted to always get on our podcast is an understanding and even a salute to the city staffers and to the county staffers, and just how dedicated they are, and how much, when you get to know them, when you go past, say, the specific issue, and you get to know them as people, how zealous they are about helping their community. And I think if I had to look at any of the development, planning and development staff or staff at the county, it's about helping people. And it really lifts your spirits, you know. And it's funny because they develop their own culture, their own cultural language, and it almost sounds like it's kind of like maybe you know, these stories we hear about people who are deployed overseas, you know, and they have their own kind of subculture and their own sense of humor and their own code they talk in. But my experience in economic development, so we work with a lot of industrial development heavily, but we also bring in road, we bring in water, electrical, distributed power from a state level. They're just so cheerful and they're so interested. And I think that's one of the things that I don't know that people talk much about that when you look at people who are in a job market or people who are in a career path. Are they interested in what they do? You know what I mean?
Oh,
They
yeah.
might say, "Sure, I'm very interested in what I do." Well, are you? And that's fine. You may have your own reasons for it, but what I found is that the staffers at the city and at the county are very interested in what they do, and that's why I think so many of them have been there for so long. It's not that they just can't find something else, is that they can't leave it because they find what they do so interesting.
I think we've got to go back to HR and ask, but I think over 25% of the majority of the lot of the city staff is eligible for retirement.
How many?
I think about
Approximate?
25% of at least I know all the directors and assistant directors. I don't know how far that goes down, but you know, our public information group does a wonderful job of saying, hey, this person's been here. We're having a party for him 25, 26 years. You look at it and you go talk to them. So what have you seen in 25, 26 years? And they just kind of, you know, they'll just, if you only knew. But these are people that, if you think about it, usually people's engagement with municipality is usually in their darkest hour, unless they're on the economic development part, and they work wonders. A lot of people know I used to work for Stock Show and Rodeo, and you talk about that informal language, and you have your own communication. I remember one of the last few rodeo production meetings we had before I resigned. It was a very complicated event, and all these people were talking and giving all these different directions. And the communication within the room of these guys that have worked together for 10, 15 years, you just look at somebody and say, yeah, and say, you would look at Martin, I would look at Bart, I'd look at Collins, I look at all these different people, and these are names of guys that are volunteers.
Sure. Well, no.
Finally somebody said, are y'all even listening? I'm like, we've got everything you've got down.
Well,
we don't
it's
have
almost
to-
like a different dialect.
It is. And we've got this communication. And when you engage with staff and you engage, you and I have our own different communication language. We sit in a room with people. We know by head nod or something that these are things we're picking up on. And there's a language, and it cultivates as over time as you develop and work with your staff, you work with your friends. And I heard a gentleman say one time, he said, beware of the group that's doing a good job and they're having a really good time kicking your butt. And if somebody's having a great time and having lots of fun and doing their job at the same time, it's hard to stop somebody like that. Very successful, very driven. They execute. Those are the people that are closers and winners.
You know, we talk about economic development and forward-facing economic development, which is kind of a buzz term that's become popular. And I think it's a good, accurate term. Forward-facing, that is, San Angelo's collective mission, which I'm a part of, to look outside the community, look outside the state, look outside the country for opportunities, and to tell our story and to build those relationships and find right deals, right transactions that are good for the company and good for the community. And yet at the same time, there's a real focus also on curating and caring for those companies, those businesses internally. And that's one of the concerns that economic developers always have, is we're so focused on external recruitment and telling our story. And I like the term awareness building. And I think there's a great importance in that. But at the same time, focusing on those core businesses and even those new businesses that are young or entrepreneurial, that really are the core and the soul of San Angelo.
Oh, that's BREP. I mean, you're talking about business.
So what does that mean? Business
retention programs that we have here. And I'll let you define it more specifically, but in my mind, it's the business that's here. They've been here. You want to retain them and you want to help them grow. I have fellow councilmen that are, and that this is one of their strategic initiatives, is let's help grow. I think it's by far best to grow one of a customer you already have than to bring one in and do that. And you have done wonderful jobs with starting to repush the Brett program. Can you give a couple examples of that?
It's kind of known within economists and economic development circles that and it can be an approximate number, but I think it's an accurate number. 80% of the wealth creation in any community comes from existing legacy companies, whether that's a small business, even an independent contractor, or a business that's been in San Angelo for decades that a lot of people might not know about. And so one of the most interesting projects that we launched about 6 years ago was a real push to focus on creating a database of how many companies, how many manufacturers are located in San Angelo. And at that time, we had 7 members of the Chamber of Commerce that were labeled as manufacturers, and so some of the bigger names, the
Right.
Johnson and Johnson Ethicon. We had the engineering and testing done up at Goodyear.
AFCO, Hirschfield, a lot of these people.
It was the big names that are very famous, really throughout the United States. And that was one of the most interesting aspects when I first got here in 2014, was recognizing that a lot of the companies in San Angelo are very well known nationally. But with understanding that once we started to really, frankly, go door to door, we came up with 86 manufacturers. And one of the most fascinating aspects about it was that these companies don't distribute or manufacture anything that's locally consumed, except one that we found, which was which was a food company. They had customers in San Angelo, but most of the products were shipped outside the state and even outside the country. And it was really interesting because we were talking to this one company and we said, how come you're not more well known in San Angelo? And they said, well, we're not going to put a billboard on Knickerbocker that states, we make the best compressors and blowout preventers in the world.
Oh, yeah.
Because no one's going to buy them.
Right.
And I thought, unless you really work for that company or work with that company, you wouldn't even know they were here. And yet they yield around $9 to $9.5 million per year just in economic yield as a small little company.
Absolutely.
And we talk about small businesses. A small business can be a pretty good sized business. We're talking about 50 people or less per the federal guidelines. And we hear that a lot with in the O&G sector, which is oil and gas sector. We talk about we hear the term big oil. Big oil is really an interesting descriptor because most oil companies that communicate with manufacturers here in San Angelo and have a presence in the Permian Basin are 20 to 30 people. And yet I guess collectively they're considered big oil, but these are what commonly are called mom and pop shops that just are small family businesses.
Well, some people get judged by their money club. I mean,
it's a great way to put it.
Yeah. What money club are you in? And however, you're 20 or 30 employees, your revenue per employee. I work for basically a manufacturing company, Bimeda, Animal Health. And they have a segment of manufacturing here that they acquired here, which was the old Texas Vet Lab. They employ, are getting closer to 30 people. It's a global company, and they are looking at, and they enjoy working here. All right. When people come here and experience, Angelo, you learn, you watch all the retirees that have been in the military. Once they retire, they're coming back to Angelo. We'll see base commanders come back from here. I mean, there are people at the Pentagon, when they leave, they're moving to San Angelo, Texas.
Yeah.
All right. And that's economic development, whether, however people look at it. But I like to take what you do, and you're out there finding people that can bring revenue into the city through manufacturing, household, however you want to count your scores and your trophies on the wall. Economic development has several different ways to do that. But what people seem to, sometimes it goes by them, is the amount of revenue that brings in from a commercial standpoint, from housing. That just increases our tax revenue. And I know some people think, well, it's all about the money. Well, when it boils down to it, the more people that are here spending money, the less money it costs you as an individual.
It provides a lot of margin.
It does.
And it provides a lot of freedom to
Your
do
revenue.
creative things that we'd like to do.
Right.
And I've had so many meetings with city managers, our city manager, Daniel Valenzuela, and the two assistant city managers, his deputies. And it's fascinating when you sit down and you talk to them one-on-one, and how they have kind of two charts. One is, here's the gotta,
Hmm?
the water infrastructure,
Yep.
the curbs, the sidewalks, the ADA improvements. They have to do it. And then there's their aspirational lists, which are really fun to read.
So
And
you
these
just wish
guys,
you had the money to go do every
they
one of those.
lament the fact they don't have it. And they've got, and one of the things I would like to say is, and you've seen this, is how creative these people are. They're very creative, almost artistic level.
And there's been some things that have been thrown down on a table in front of me, and I'm like, I don't think out of the 100,000 people we have here, 99,000 would understand or get that.
Yeah.
But all 100 would benefit from pulling something like that, being that creative and going, this would spread out everywhere. You know, we just today we left a family sports venue to come here for this podcast, but it wasn't a youth sports, it was family sports, and also it's year round. So the fact of what this one commercial development can do 365 days a year helps and benefits everybody.
Let's talk about families for a minute. When we were working on the Amazon transaction, which might have been the worst kept secret in San Angelo for that 14 months we were working on.
There's others that are rival that.
Yeah. And so we were very deeply embedded in that. And it was a very successful project. It was a very special project for Amazon. I think it was special for San Angelo, but as you got to know the team and we were working on an intensive project like that, the team in Seattle and Nashville and Phoenix, you get to know them really well.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is they seem really encouraged that they wanted to tell us that the median age of San Angelo at that moment was 34. It's now 35. And that's a very young population. And they enhanced that information, assuming you like an average young population, that does not count head count or demographics at Goodfellow, all the students, or ASU. And so we kind of back of the napkined it with them during the negotiations. We said, well, what would it look like if you baked in those? And they said, you'd probably be at 32 years old. That's a young city. And, we've all heard this, it's a retirement community, and there is that for sure. But it's a very young community. And when we were working with Amazon, one of the aspects we thought was interesting was just kind of understanding what do you do? I mean, yes, you're a transportation and distribution company, but how do you have a little 35,000 square foot facility that's going to perform the same function as a much larger facility? And you remember this was part of their wagon wheel program, where they were just introducing the concept of a
hub and spoke,
rural, super rural mini distribution facility. Well, how do you get that? And they said, well, the products aren't going to last very long. They're not going to have a very long life inside. It's basically intercept, last mile, send it out. But they track, of course, all the different types of products. And they said it has a heavy emphasis on products that appeal to 18 to 25-year-olds. I said, well, what does that mean? They said electronics and baby stuff. Now, it's not all that they carry, of course, but I thought that was really an interesting,
especially if
interesting fact.
If you look at that pie, everybody that's ordered from Amazon probably touches well into 90% of the people in the county.
Probably.
Right. And for that focus, for them to be able to go in and just pull out the specifics and go 18 to 34 in this area, electronics and, baby supply. I mean, to me, the way those people do data, track data, last mile deliveries, as you were bringing this thing forward, you got it here. I mean, it's long after the days of Michael Looney in 60, 70 years, somebody's going to point at Amazon warehouse and say, Looney picked that one up in a conversation and brought it here. And that's a major score, but you knew how to present what we had.
Yeah.
This is what we have. And you got them to the table. We did the engagement, the marriage, and they have built their Amazon family over there. And it's all one. And it's, I can't tell you how many people that employs. You probably know those numbers, but that's a major win.
About 200.
It's about 200. And people,
when we started, they said it'd be 58.
The optics are people see where Amazon's at and they're like, you know what? If they had enough wisdom and foresight to go there, I need to be there too. The ancillary events and commercial that's going to follow them will be beneficial for years. I mean, that was a great one. I mean, to me, that's economic development in its purest form.
It was really fun to work on. And it was kind of a tense project because Amazon's second largest company in the world, and they very corporate, very young. It was really kind of funny because we had a couple of Zoom calls with the development team, and it really looked like high school. I mean, they're very polished, very smart, super clean conference room. You could see Seattle, sky, the bay, and the mist, and very intelligent, wonderful human beings to work with. It was awesome. It was really a joy.
They do a good job at finding the brightest minds.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they found the brightest minds to help develop and start and move that company. Bezos has done a wonderful job of just, here's what I want. And I mean, I would hate to be one of his direct reports, you know, but long story short, did a great job of creating a really good team.
They allow a lot of creativity too. And there were several moments where we had to pivot because of design and spacing, and then also future casting, you know, well, if we fit it's on 12 acres, so it's a pretty good sized piece of land. And, I think one of the things that was kind of the most interesting was, you know, people have asked me, well, how did you get a conversation going with the economic development department?
I've heard this story, but I certainly want you to tell this story.
It was really kind of neat. We did a LinkedIn post, and it was on our distribution and I-27 and the new interstate that's planned to come through 14, which is in the future, and just kind of just a general post. We were sort of sitting around going, well, what do we post today? You know, what would be kind of interesting and someone might like to read? And the site selector, there are 4 of them in the United States, picked it up, and he called us and he said, hey, you know, I remember San Angelo because my granddad was an old cowboy who's still alive. He still is. And he said, you know, San Angelo came up a lot as a kid in conversation. It was sort of this really authentic, really cool city, and had a lot of history that people, I think, don't really know, and I don't even really know about its cowboy heritage and its rodeo heritage. And we just had this conversation and kind of became friends on the phone and just had a really delightful conversation. He goes, well, let me tell you who I am and what I'm working on. And I'm looking for some mid-sized, smaller, rural, somewhat isolated cities, but not incorporated near a large metropolitan area. And he said, I'm working with a distribution facility. And I said, okay. He said, well, you know, can we just keep moving forward and get me some land options? And I did. And I actually thought it was somebody else because I'd been talking to a company.
Well, and some people don't understand. They just don't put their name out.
Oh, they were very secretive. And I had no idea. I'd been talking to another distribution company based in the Southeast United States a lot. And I figured they had just finally hired a real estate agent to help them, you know, kind of shepherd the process. And so all this time I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to say anything, but I know who it is. And started to report it to my board, and, you know, we codenamed it. And I said, I think I know who it is. And I didn't use their name, but I said, this would be a really cool contribution to our supply chain and logistics sector, which San Angelo is actually really famous for in a lot of different areas because it's in the geographic middle of North America, not the United States, but North America. And so over time, I would call the company that I thought it was and ask them, you know, do you have any more information you need from San Angelo? And they're like, no, we're pretty good. I said, are you sure? They said, yeah, we're pretty good.
Sure?
Are you really, really sure? Yeah, I think we're good. I'm not even sure we're going to move forward on the expansion. I thought, okay. So over time, then it was revealed who it was pretty far into the process too. But what was interesting, where I was going to go with this, is that to your point about economic clustering, where you
and that's the word I wanted you to use.
Yeah.
And you coached me and taught me this word, you know, a couple of years ago, and then you re-brought it up to me. But clustering and putting the right number of legs underneath the table is so important.
We were really secretive about it, and we were really hyper vigilant, and they were too. I mean, they were very, very vigilant, and they actually had a special protocol for us if we detected anybody in the community talking about it, and we weren't to acknowledge it, but we were to let them know, hey, someone may have said something, and And it felt sort of like a little bit of a game, and it kind of made the process interesting. I think we got a little paranoid about it, but we started getting phone calls from developers from other parts of the United States that knew way more about that potential development than they should have. And that was because they, through their information networks, knew where Amazon was looking, and not just in San Angelo, but other parts of the United States. And they would kind of start edging in and, hey, do you have any land maybe kind of near that 12 acres? And we're like, yeah. What makes you so interested in that?
Why do you really 12 acres?
It was really a fun process, and I can report that I don't have the certificates with me, but the site manager out there called us, maybe 8 months ago, and he said, "Hey, just wanted to let you know that leadership just flew out." Of course, I'm going, "Why didn't you tell me before?"
So, and I've got a funny story to bolt on to that.
An award for the highest volume, highest performing RSR in the country. And now there's like lots of them. I don't know, maybe 50 of them or 40 of them around the country. It's
Tell me what an RSR is.
Rural super rural is what they call that type of a development. And they call it WTX9. That's the company's code for San Angelo. And they actually have a branded logo, and it's of a guy riding a bucking bronco. But he has a rope in his hands too, and I don't know if those two go together.
Sometimes it's a little far west. They don't go together, but you know what? We'll take it.
Well, that was a fun project, and we really made a good impression with Amazon. And they're actually a really fun company to deal with.
They're fun, but I tell you, you never know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I have been fortunate, and I love to travel, and I've got over 2 million miles on American Airlines in and out of San Angelo, transverse and all across the U.S., where I've been fortunate enough to work for years. But when you come back and you're riding an airplane, part of it is just profiling people.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'd just sit there and I start with somebody's shoes. I look at their shoes and, okay, here, and I know it sounds odd, but you look, well, then you see backpacks. Well, when you see a backpack that says Amazon, J&J, and then you hear them and go, oh, well, I'm going to be here for a little bit. Then I'm going to get a rental car, run over to Abilene and looking in. You hear people say things. All right. And I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to pick up the phone and go, okay, Looney, is this happening or is it not? And if you can't tell me, I get it, but this is, and yeah, I spotted some Amazon people on the phone. All right. We have other companies here that I can't pronounce their name and still have trouble getting it proper, but I recognize them, and you hear the language, and they will sit there and talk. They'll be at baggage fixing to pick up their bags, and well, we're going over here and check out this side, or we'll do that. And you and me just did a site tour, within the past 24 hours.
Sure did.
Long story short, it amazes me how these people come together and they find, I call it a little fortune in San Angelo.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what I want to ask you, and here's something I want you to do. I'm going to kind of flip the table a little bit here, and I want to ask you some questions about economic development. Once somebody comes here, what are the next questions they ask in pertaining to their family?
Mm-hmm.
What questions does, if I go home and say, honey, it looks like we're going to do a reload to San Angelo, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
What question does my spouse start asking?
A lot of times they want to ask, what is there to do for the children? That's the biggest one. And so we are very good at working with, we have a department at the Chamber of Commerce called the DMO, which is that stands for Destination and Marketing.
Right.
And really what it is travel and tourism, but you could also call it family events and lifestyle quality. It's kind of the same thing. And so that department actually is in the Chamber of Commerce, and we work with them really closely. And we have a lot of the materials, all the materials that they utilize to appeal to certain demographics. So if somebody's really into like reenacting historic, living history, they know how to vector that information to that demographic, or if it's children, or if it's people who have been relocated from, Maxwell Air Force Base to San Angelo, and they know how to focus on, well, do you have teenagers or do you have toddlers? And here's the spread of things to do.
Here's how you blend in.
And I think the schools, the private schools, the public schools, and just the things to
I think that one's huge. I think
really, really big. We answer a lot of questions about that too.
So how big a thing do you think the bond played into that? Does that give you ammunition?
Yes, it does. In fact,
And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a good way.
No, we actually had two companies that one landed, one still we're working with them, that actually identified knowledge of the upcoming vote on the ISD, and they said the vote direction will influence corporate's decision to go or no go on San Angelo. And they assured us, they said, and they were really, really cool people. And they said, we're not expecting the problems to be fixed today. That's okay. But if we're going to land here and spend this much money relocating a facility and then expanding it into phase 2 rapidly, and then networking all of our logistics and supply chain to San Angelo, hubbing out to the West Coast, East Coast, we need to know where the ISD will be in 5, 8, and 10.
All the civic
I don't know
parks.
why they identified 5, 8, and 10. It seemed kind of arbitrary to me, and maybe it was just an example, but they wanted to know that things are progressing forward, which allows them to recruit people who don't work for this company yet into San Angelo. And when we were able to, they actually, one of them called us before the bond, before it hit the papers, but we didn't have time to outreach to them. And they called us and they said, man, that is really good news. That shows us that the community really cares about their ISD. And one of the guys said, he said something along the lines of, they accepted the discomfort of what that means, taking on that kind of a challenge, but they're doing it for the best of reasons. And that was awesome.
Well, it shows commitment. So
yes, that's what I'm trying to get to.
If I was going to ask you, and I was going to come here and say, okay, Sir Michael, what are if I'm looking at a piece of pie, tell me all the slices here. And you would start with, where you could start and work your way around the circle. You could start with Goodfellow.
Mm.
You could start with Shannon as far as a regional healthcare provider. You could go with ASU and say, oh, by the way, we've got a gym over here that's one of the premier and, flight schools, cybersecurity. It amazes me, and I'm glad to be an Angelo State graduate. I mean, Ram fan for life. But you start working around, you look at the school has just invested $400 million into catching up and making itself better. The city has had a small bond come through to renovate for entertainment. River Stage. Does that give you enough pieces to the pie?
It does. All right. It really does. I get asked that a lot by city council members and county commissioners. And I think that's one thing that I find really needs to be told is how conscientious the elected leadership are, in that I get asked this frequently, do you have the tools? Can you tell the story the way you want to tell it? Do you have the tools? And the answer is yes. And privately, I would tell them, if I didn't, I'd tell you where where the opportunities are for improvement. But I really do. And you're right. You mentioned some really awesome and very useful anchors of our community. And that makes a huge difference.
And that's the best word you could ever describe what I threw out there. Those are anchors.
They are.
They're not going away.
And they're cultural anchors, but they're also economic anchors. And in fact, you may have noticed that I brought somebody to our walkthrough with this company yesterday who was steeped in the agricultural sector, because I wasn't sure what kind of ag questions we would be asked by that gentleman that we were with. So I wanted to be ready just in case it became an ag discussion. And sometimes you'll find that with companies that they'll appoint somebody from leadership to go scout Central Texas or West Texas or all to go find a facility, but they're really not site selector, broker type people. They're really almost like engineers. And they're very interested. They constantly default back to their engineering background because it's interesting to them. Just we talked about interest. And it was a similar situation with a company I've talked about quite a bit in the past few months that I just really engaged with. It's a company from Germany called Rosenberger. And Rosenberger is a huge company in Germany, and it's a privately owned company, and they make electronics equipment, mostly in the telecoms, aviation sector.
Rosenberger's huge, and it was very few people over there.
Very few people know about them.
They're
kind of like the GE of Germany.
They're a backbone and a spine to a lot of the structure in electronics.
They are, and very precise, very German, if you will. Everything is based on precision and accuracy and forecasting. And when we were working with them, I can tell the story now, and I think it's pretty interesting. We were working with them. We were working with a guy who was an engineer, and we could tell, and I could tell pretty quickly, he had been tasked by headquarters in Friedolfing, Germany, figure out a way to get this facility moved somewhere out of the eastern seaboard and get it somewhere in the Southwest United States. And he called us, and we had a lot of conversations, sort of economic developer to site selector type discussions. And I could tell he was following, but I was really having to coach him through it. And it became kind of apparent that his guy's an engineer, a super cool guy. And what I did was I took a little bit of a chance. I learned a little bit about him and what Rosenberger would be doing, hopefully in San Angelo, which of course they did land here, which was pretty awesome. And I put him in touch with Dr. David Bixler at Angelo State University, who is a gem. David is so cool.
Bix has been around.
It's so cool. Well, I found out, I called David Bixler and I said, Dr. Bixler, can you tell me about high frequency modulation? And he starts laughing. He said, yeah, I teach that. And he goes into, he said, well, do you mean European transmission systems or North American transmission systems? By then I knew, okay, now I'm in trouble.
I got the right guy, but you have the right guy on the
It's kind of like throwing a little bit of a foreign language out to somebody who's a native, and then they start speaking all in that foreign language. That's what I had done. So I said, stop. I'm going to put you in touch with some guy. Keep it quiet for now, but I want you to talk to him. And I got a call back several days later on a Saturday from both guys within 20 minutes. And they said, my gosh, that was the best 3-hour conversation we've ever had about frequency modulation, high frequency modulation, manufacturing, North American type of transmission. And I knew right then, I think we probably have a good shot at getting them to move here. And it was so much so that Rosenberger they have 2 shifts, but they made a little mini shift in the evening specifically for students. And they're not going to make a lot of money because it's not a lot of hours.
No, but it's
they
a commitment.
They can come and feel what it's like to work there.
For their training group.
Yes.
We're probably in the last 10 minutes of this, and I want to shift a different way. I want to go down to that part. Let's talk finances and money. Economic development.
Mm-hmm.
It's growing exponentially every year. In my opinion, if we don't have economic development at an exponential rate, we're falling behind. Who are our biggest, and let's not call them enemies. Let's say, do we compete regionally against our sister cities?
Oh, that's a great question.
So I look at Abilene, I look at Midland, Abilene, I look at, they've got some commercial development in the data industry and some other things going on.
Yeah.
I look at Midland, Odessa, agriculture, they wish they had our rodeo. I don't mean that bad, but they're trying to do things that improve that Western horsemanship. Territory. I look at, Lubbock and those areas as things up. We have to stay in the same category. We can't fall behind these people. So what happens if we fall behind?
Well,
in your opinion, I mean, where does that?
When I look at other cities, when I first started in this position, I really looked at the nearby sister cities. And nearby could be 3 hours away, 4 hours away.
Nearby here,
there are nearby cities that are our peer cities that are further away, way further away than even Austin.
Yeah, population. Let's say Wichita Falls, College Station. So people like those.
And I used to watch them and really try to understand them as well as I could. But also, I wanted to see is it a competition? And it kind of depends on what sector of the economy we're focusing on, because there are certain things that, say, the Lubbock economy has with regard to farming, harvest.
Absolutely,
it's a lot higher volume than the Concho Valley, because Concho Valley is kind of split, where it's really, if you look at San Angelo and Tom Green County and the neighboring counties, it's really the eastern side, whereas in Lubbock it's all around it. And I looked at what are they focusing on. And in conversations with our, if you will, competing city economic developers, the whole philosophy is really focus on the strengths of what your community has,
what you do well,
and really build on that, and don't try to compete. And they were great. I mean, they gave me some really great lessons on. Don't try to do what the neighbor's doing 2 hours up the street. because what they're doing, they might wish they hadn't done, but they're so deep in it, they can't get out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, food and fiber, 100 miles north
And I'm
of
not
here.
it's
not
a really
us.
complex question to answer, but what's great about San Angelo is that we've got such a quilt work, and I guess I'll answer it this way. When I first came to San Angelo, a lot of people asked me, what is San Angelo? And what they mean is, let's say Wichita, Kansas is the aviation capital of the
Mecca.
United States, right?
Yes.
Hands down. Just one example. And I think that San Angelo, my view, looking back at the history of our economy and different economic sectors, is San Angelo, I think, always wanted to be, as it should aspire to be, the something of the United States. And, the aviation, the electronics, name it. And it really couldn't. It never could get enough energy to be the medical device manufacturing hub of the United States. But it has a piece of it that has been grounded here since 1964, and I'm talking about Ethicon.
Absolutely.
And then we have a very unique automotive components manufacturer here that a lot of people don't know about. We have an aviation components manufacturer here. We've got specialty electronics manufacturing, software. I mean, Time Clock Plus, which is now TCP Software, they're the second largest competitor to Kronos.
Oh yeah, it's technology tower.
So what we have is, I couldn't give him an answer. It's like, well, it's a quilt work of all these different sectors, and where we don't own the market.
It's one of the best ways I've ever heard it described.
Piece of it, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And then those pieces, you find out, kind of being a nerd in my position, work together, and they work together very, very well. But they don't crow about it. They don't talk about it. These two companies are collaborating and work with that company on a much larger contract. I see it all the time.
So we've got to wrap up here in a second, and I want you to tell me, in your eyes, what are the next, let's say, give me 2 or 3 big steps that Angelo needs to look at as far as economic development and generating revenue, which as economic development goes up and provides revenue, our tax rates go down.
Mm-hmm.
And some people have a problem with the grasp on that. But as things go up, we're able to take the pressure off of the citizen and put it back on some development that's going to pay those down. What are the next 1 or 2 items that Angelo's going to focus on?
You say that, and we look at, say, a large corporation, big factory. And I'm not going to name a name, but let's just say a large operation. 200 people work there, global market capture, well capitalized. It's easier for a company like that example to absorb a tax burden. It just is.
Yeah, it's part of their business.
It's like a small business. But when you look at a home, that's very difficult because you've taken it down to the smallest denominator of taxation burden. And so spreading it out to an industrial base, it makes it it makes it easier for people to thrive in their homes and not have to use their home essentially as a tax yield device.
You want a tax base that's broad.
You want to spread it out, but to answer your question, I think that we're going to see strides in software related technologies, software as a service. I think that the ability for companies to more affordably create useful and constructive specialized software packages will be much easier because you don't have to go through all the heavy coding that you may be used to. I think that cybersecurity is a subsector of our economy that is going to really flourish. That is, in my opinion, kind of nichey. And I think it's going to become more accessible and widespread. And I think that we've got a really good basis right here too. I think that metals manufacturing and fabrication is going to continue to thrive. I think we're going to see a shedding of a lot of really experienced artisans that are in that sector, and you're going to see a shift towards robotics. So as a mayor, you will probably in the next 12 to 24 months see the Development Corporation executive director, that's Ryan Gaddy, and his team, along with us, will probably come to the community leadership and talk more about how these companies are going to input more robotics and CNC type machinery. And I'm talking about some pretty sophisticated stuff that's expensive, but it's not expensive when you look at it from a long-term investment that's going to keep San Angelo firmly ensconced as a reliable North American steel fabrication city. And it really is. In fact, one of our companies, Western Tower, was on How It's Made Modern Marvels just recently, which we thought was kind of cool. It's a pretty cool show. But I think you're going to see manufacturing and fabrication is not going to go away. And you hear all this talk about, well, AI is going to replace all these jobs.
Oh, no.
It won't replace artisanal crafts work that's done by human beings.
Oh, yeah.
and can really only be done well by people. And I think you're also going to see a really interesting sector is going to be aviation. Aviation is a you know a lot about it. It kind of gyrates, and it's tied to population movement, but it's also tied to some politics too. And I think you're seeing this really big resurgence in an interest in aviation growing, commercial aviation and cargo aviation growing as a sector. And I think you're going to start to see that become much more accessible in the future, to where I think general aviation is going to get a boost. And I also think you're going to start to see a lot of companies that are kind of in between charter and the legacy carriers. You're going to start to see kind of those mid-range membership-driven airlines. I really think you're going to start to see a lot more of that because the population of the United States will begin to demand it. And then Congress will feel that pressure. And that's going to, I think, open up a lot of really interesting doors.
Well, I think we're positioned in an absolutely wonderful spot for the next 20, 30 years. We just have to make sure, and with I would say the success and the continued drive of our economic development, DMO, our civic partners, stakeholders all around. Everybody's, everywhere I go, somebody go, I have an idea about bringing somebody to town. I have an idea. And these may be across 7 or 8, 9, 10 different industrial avenues and areas. And if we get 1 out of 4, that's a win.
Sure.
And that's exponentially better than other people do. I'm hoping we get 3 out of 4. And I want to thank you for being the lead. I mean, you're the tip of the spear when a lot of that comes in. And what's cool is we've made some investment back into economic development. We don't want to play catch. We want to go find the ones that fit for us. And that's a wish and a challenge and an initiative to, let's not play catch. Let's go find them. And y'all have done a wonderful job.
Well, you know what really helps that? And I think one of your previous questions, if I may, was, are we deploying enough money into the economic development effort? And I would have to answer that by saying it kind of depends. If you just had a dedicated economic development team, you might need to expand that team. So you need more money.
Yep.
But here's what I've engaged in is that we have elected officials, we have county commissioners, we have civic leaders who are kind of act as part of the team. ASU, Professor Bixler, there's an example, became for 6 months a direct part of our economic development effort. And so what we do is, because we don't have the same economic development funding available as, say, Houston or a Dallas-Fort Worth city, but we play to the talent that we have here, and we have no problem reaching out to ASU or Howard College. Howard College was instrumental in getting the go for the new Santa Juanita skilled nursing facility on YMCA Drive.
Oh, yeah.
It's a gorgeous facility, state-of-the-art, 52,000 square foot facility. Well, it was a group of people from Howard College who met with the developers and said, we can handle your LVN to RN needs. We've got it. To the point where then the skilled nursing facility said, tell you what, I'll do you one better. We'll help pay for their tuition. If they'll come to us for a year, we'll pay for a year. If they'll come for us 2 years, we'll pay for 2 years.
Oh, yeah.
It was off to the races because we brought in that partner.
That changes people's lives.
We don't want economic development to be a surprise. We're not looking for the big reveal and the top of fold oh my gosh, I didn't know that company was looking at San Angelo. It needs to be a true team effort, and the companies, the customers, they see that and they value that, because the one thing a company doesn't want to do is land in San Angelo and realize that the community really isn't a good fit, but they got a great sales pitch, or it looked good at first, and once they land here, that's a bad time to plan. And so that's why we try to bring in as many voices as we can. And there are times where we'll tell them, look, we want to bring you in, but we need you to really keep it quiet. And they all do. We've never had a problem with that.
It's a huge motto that I see some of the best people say. And it wasn't mine. I didn't can it, but I borrowed it from somebody. I said, I'd rather you not be here than wish you weren't.
I like that a lot.
And sponsor money, spending money at places where I worked, selling cattle vaccine. I'd rather you not spend it than in 60 days, 90 days, or a year, you wish you wouldn't have. Don't let that be happen here. But our focus and our team, I haven't had anybody that ever said, I wish I didn't make this move here. I mean, it's usually, well, I'm trying to move this person here, or I may bring this here. I never hear that. All right. And I think that speaks volumes in the world of economic development about, if anybody's watching, when they get there, we go way beyond, what's needed. And in the end, we want them to hear, I am so glad I made that choice. And I think
we've had that. We've had that. I mean, I don't know that we talk about it, and maybe as much as we should, but we get that a lot. And it's all that those relationships build. And I can tell you, San Angelo has a nice, good, manageable, steady growth ahead of it. It's not going to burgeon like Round Rock, which is so close to Austin, where it was inevitable, dude. That city's going to explode, and there's nothing you can do about it. San Angelo's far enough away from the major MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas, meaning big cities, to where it can manage its inflow of what it wants its development to look like. And when you look at that habit and that culture and that investment from city leadership and county leadership, they defined that 20 years ago as smart growth. All the smart growth banner is making sure you have investment from the community leaders and from members of the community who maybe don't have a very loud voice or a known voice, but get them embedded in understanding, how do you want your community to grow, without it being overrun by industry where choices are now eliminated. And so that's something that San Angelo does organically. And I think that has a lot to do with why we've been so successful.
I love to look at it in the fact of how much revenue can you bring with the least amount of expense as far as infrastructure. All right. So we're looking at some really big things. All right. That if they land here, it will provide double the revenue of what we have now. So in other words, to put it in a good analogy, San Angelo would have to double to be able to have the revenue that we're looking at getting here.
Yes.
With bringing maybe a small, very, very small footprint. So your revenue per resident and tax revenue and all this suddenly became so much more efficient without the cost of extra infrastructure and all the things that go with it. And I want you to keep working on them. All right. Those things that we can come in here, but we have managed our growth. And this goes back, councils and mayors before me have always made good decisions in the long run. What's the best long-term success for San Angelo? I think that's the key. We have to keep that conservative approach, but we're going to be as aggressive as we can trying to get them in the door.
Very well said. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for the time. I mean, we probably need to do this at least once a quarter, sit down and talk.
It's been a lot of fun, and I think very informative, and we get a lot of hits, a lot of links, and a lot of hits on our little show here, and we do this because we love our community, and it's always great to hear from you. And thank you for all the work that you've done. From the previous mayor, Mayor Brenda Goner. I knew her pretty well, especially when she was mayor. And the phone never stops ringing. And
Brenda, I promise you, Brenda's out there working today, trying to bring more people to town.
She is. And
absolutely.
And you find out that you're really in high demand, and you have to pivot very quickly, call to call to call. but you get a really good understanding of what people's concerns are and what their aspirations are too. So thank you very much for being here.
Mike, loved every minute of it. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you very much again for joining us on Moves That Matters. Here with Mayor Tom Thompson, I'm Michael Looney, and we appreciate you tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next podcast.